writer. This is Talking SEC Football. John Pitts, our sports editor, who adds a lot to this program when he's here, but right now he's out buying a car. Logan, there was a little accident with the deer, as I recall, a few weeks ago with John.
Yeah, that's what I hear. John is trying to take out the deer population one by one. I don't think he's doing it the most cost-efficient way. Most people take them out with guns or bows and arrows at this time of year, but John's taking them out with his car, and I don't think that's probably the most cost-effective way, especially on what sports writers and sports editors make for a living.
Well, John will be back with us next week, and I want to remind you folks, we got an 8 o'clock kickoff for Ole Miss and Texas A&M this week. We will have most of our coverage online on the blogs and at djournal.com. We will be holding the press. We will have at least 2 stories in the Sunday edition of the paper, and we'll have lots of coverage online as well. Logan, looking back, we kind of coined a hashtag last week, Football-mageddon, and I just don't think you could have written the script any better for both Mississippi SEC schools. Let's start with State, and then we'll swing to Ole Miss. Looking back at the Texas A&M game, I guess just going into that week, what was that week of coverage like for you and the build-up? I know you had a storyline there with the suspension of Dylan Day, him not being able to play. Obviously, Beckwith filled that role more than adequately, but just take me through the week and let's talk about the game. I think a lot of people thought State could go into that game and win. A lot of people predicted State to win. But I don't know that many people predicted the blowout that ensued there at Davis Wade.
Yeah, and I thought State had a chance to win that ball game as well, but I predicted it to be close. I thought it was going to be another shootout, a game that went down to the wire, and that's not what happened. It kind of looked like it was going to be. Texas A&M took the opening kickoff and scored in about 4 or 5 plays and made it look really, really easy. And if you watched last year's game, you're like, well, here we go again. And that's really about all they had offensively until late in that ball game. Mississippi State did a good job defensively of settling down, slowing down that offense, getting them off the field on third downs, and kind of creating long, advantageous matchups on third down for Mississippi State. A lot of those were third and long plays, and Texas A&M dropped a lot of passes as well during that ball game. They got a lot of pressure on Kenny Hill. Mississippi State's offense clicked just about the entire day. Really, were balanced on offense, rushing and passing. Dak Prescott had another big day. Josh Robinson had another big day. You look on the defensive side of the ball, Richie Brown had 3 interceptions, tied a school single-game record. And kind of what was the most impressive thing to me about what Mississippi State did offensively was the fact you mentioned it. They were without center Dylan Day, had to move their guard Ben Beckwith over to center. Not only that, Mississippi State is lost wide receiver Jamion Lewis in that game, who was their number one or their top receiver. He's actually the top returning receiver coming back in the SEC this year. He got hurt, was banged up a little bit from that LSU game. The injury kind of re-aggravated on Thursday. They tried to rest him on Friday. He couldn't even walk on Saturday, so he was out for that game. And then during pregame warm-ups, the punter, Devin Bell, tweaks his groin, not going to be able to kick, so they have to burn a red shirt on true freshman Logan Cook. He finds out about a minute before kickoff that, hey, you're the kickoff and punter for this game, and he filled in very adequately.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's talk about A&M's receivers a little bit. I think A&M overall, Logan, and you make teams that we're covering, so we don't see a lot of the other games, but just watching A&M from a couple of opportunities in the press box before I turned my attention to my own game. I'm going back to the Arkansas game a couple of weeks ago. I thought this carried over into State's game as well. I didn't think they were a very good tackling team. I mean, statistically, you look at them defensively, and they've got a great freshman at one defensive end, but that hasn't helped them in many of the defensive categories. I thought they missed a lot of open field tackles against Arkansas, and that resulted in a lot more yards and big plays for Arkansas. A&M was able to come back and win that game. What stood out to me against State was the drop passes. And, some of those were forced and some were not. And I was really kind of surprised by that. But then I look back at this A&M team and I think, they caught the attention of the nation after beating South Carolina on opening night. Just throttled them in Columbia. Well, that win loses some luster every time South Carolina takes the field. After that game, it was a pretty easy schedule for A&M until Starkville. So while we thought we knew something about them, maybe we just didn't know that much.
Yeah, and I think another thing that hurt Texas A&M in that game last week was Malcolm Kennedy didn't play, who's their leading receiver. He did not play in that ball game. So, not only was Mississippi State dealing with their leading receiver out, Texas A&M was dealing with the same thing on the other sideline.
Well, and he's actually questionable for this week's game against Ole Miss. Let's look back for Ole Miss. Obviously, a huge win. You could call it, I guess, the biggest win in the history of the program because they beat a number one ranked team for the first time. That wasn't a consensus number one, but Alabama was number one in the coaches poll. I've hesitated to call it the biggest win in program history because I wasn't around for the best years of the Ole Miss history. I think it's clearly the biggest win in the modern history of Ole Miss football. And Logan, right after that, it's like the conversation. There was a lot about Ole Miss, on a national level. But what I'm hearing more is about Alabama and is the dynasty over? Have the cracks in the foundation been revealed? The conversation has been more about Alabama after one loss than it's been about Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss geared up and beat a really good team last week. Alabama could end up on top when it's all over. We'll wait and see. But that was an explosive offense that a very good Ole Miss defense contained. Alabama drove, got some yards. They were held to about 200 yards below what they normally get. But bottom line is the Alabama offense got in the end zone only one time. Ole Miss gave up another touchdown on a fumble, and replays showed there should have been a face mask call before that fumble. I think the face mask was clear. Alabama cornerback Cyrus Jones during the week, told Alabama media that he didn't grab the face mask, that he just bumped it. I thought on replays it looked like he grabbed it and let it go, which is still a face mask. You look at how Itavius Mather's head turned on that play, and I think a flag should have been thrown. Be that as it may, the ball should not have been fumbled. You've got to protect the ball better in that situation. That was how Alabama got their second touchdown. That Alabama offense with T.J. Yeldon and Derrick Henry and Amari Cooper, just 3 points in the second half. So really a great game by the Ole Miss defense. The Ole Miss offense came around. Big plays in the second half by Bo Wallace. The running game was okay. They got some things done, finished with just 72 yards total. You knew they weren't going to get a whole lot of rushing yards against Alabama. I think this is still a better rushing Ole Miss team. The progress, the improvement really began the week before against Memphis, the week before against Memphis. We'll see if they really are much improved because Texas A&M defensively should not provide the challenge that Alabama did. So, Logan, looking ahead, Auburn, what do you know about the Tigers right now?
I know that it's going to be the best team that Mississippi State's faced all year. It's without a doubt. I mean, they faced two top 10 opponents the last 2 weeks and really blown them out and dominated them. I really don't see that happening this week. I just see another close game that's went down to the wire. You look at this series, and 3 out of the last 4 have gone down to almost the final play of the ball game. I think two of the last 4 have gone down to the last play of the ball game, and I expect another close one this year. I think it's 2 evenly matched teams. I think it's 2 almost identical teams. They like to run that hurry-up spread style offense. They both have a defense that can be dominant at times. And there's a lot of playmakers. They're a team that like to spread the ball around. They really don't have just one particular superstar on either side of the ball. It's kind of a superstar by committee type of thing for Mississippi State and Auburn. And looking at this matchup, I really don't see the level of excitement. I mean, many people have talked about it's the biggest game in the history of Mississippi. For the fact of a 2 and a 3 ranked team, that's never happened before in this state. But at the same time, it kind of feels a little bit like the last two games for Mississippi State. They, talking to the players and the coaches, they've kind of just approached it with, "Hey, it's just another game that we have to play, just like the last two have been." You really don't see just that hype and anticipation that maybe you would have seen in years past in a makeup of this caliber. So, the excitement of College Game Day coming to Starkville, I think they got kind of a tease a little bit last year and kind of got, last week when SEC Nation came. I think the fan base kind of turned out for that and really just kind of built that level of excitement. And it's really just not the hugest thing in the world for game day to be here. Just the fact that they had SEC Nation last week, they got game day this week on back-to-back weekends. They've kind of created that atmosphere, and facing the third straight top 10 opponent, Mississippi State, just kind of is taking a lot of business-like approach this week.
I guess the big question is who is going to be the guest picker. Logan, I heard you turned them down.
I did. It's just because it's scheduling conflicts and stuff. I just couldn't do it. But yeah, my guess, and I actually made this guess last Saturday, is Jerry Rice. And Jerry Rice is in town. He was in town last week. He's been in town. He's been by the Mississippi State football complex this week, and he's from this area. He's from Crawford originally. His family's still in this area. I really think that would be a good pick for game day to go with that route. I mean, obviously there's no better wide receiver that's ever played the game than Jerry Rice, and he's right here. You don't have to fly anybody in. It's really not the sexiest pick that they could go with, but I don't think of anybody that can get better.
Now, why did Jerry Rice choose Valley over State way back in the day? I'm sure that it wasn't. He chose Valley.
Exactly. Mississippi State didn't recruit him, and that's kind of one thing Dan Mullen talked about when he got to Mississippi State. Of all these big-name stars that never played at Mississippi State, you look at Walter Payton, Jerry Rice, Brett Favre, Steve McNair. None of those guys were even hardly recruited by Mississippi State. So he didn't want to lose out on guys like that. He knows that talent is in this state, and he doesn't want to miss out on any of those guys again.
So where is the setup? Where is the stage for game day?
From my understanding, they're actually building the stage as we're doing this podcast. Basically, it's the same place the SEC Nation set was set up last week. They're going to have most of it hanging out into the street, actually, with the dog walk kind of coming behind them. Now, the timing is going to be a little bit different. Last week, there was an 11 a.m. kickoff, and the dog walk actually happened during SEC Nation. It's not going to take place, I don't think, with a 2:30 kickoff. The dog walk probably come through about probably 12:30. So I don't expect it to happen simultaneously with the broadcast, but it still should create a pretty electric atmosphere out there in the junction.
Well, I tell you what, it was certainly an electric atmosphere in all of Mississippi last Saturday. The Grove was for game day just more, just whatever you think you have seen in the Grove for a big game before, just multiply that. I'll tell you, Logan, I didn't get there. I didn't try to get there right at the beginning or right before, anything like that. In terms of trying to cover the game day program, there were so many media requests that basically we were approved for different shifts. Well, my shift to watch part of the game day show was for 9:45 a.m. So I actually ended up driving over to Oxford a little bit later than I would have otherwise, and I got into town. There was no traffic. I knew where the traffic was. I knew where everybody was, but I stopped and got a hot chocolate and was waited on pretty quickly and back on the road, and went to the media parking area, rode the shuttle over, walked through the circle, which is a little bit west of the Grove. Walking through the circle first in front of the Lyceum, Logan, it looked like everybody coming out of their hidey hole after the nuclear explosion, because there were just a few people up in the circle. This tent might have been completely vacant. That tent might have had one or two people. Just very few people in the circle for what it would normally have been on the morning of an afternoon game. And, of course, all that crowd was at the stage for game day and around that area. And here's something else of interest. One, if the season plays out the way Ole Miss would want, game day could be back for the Auburn game on November 1st. They already have talked about that. Game day producer Lee Fitting saying that the Ole Miss Auburn game is on his short list right now. A lot of football between now and then, so I'm sure that that list will have the potential to change a lot. The other thing, though, Logan, you talked about the SEC Nation crew being in Starkville last week. Then game day was at Ole Miss. Now game day is in Starkville. SEC Nation will be in Oxford next week for Ole Miss and Tennessee. So it's really been, it will end up being 3 big weeks of an ESPN presence for a really neat football story in Mississippi, Logan. I mean, we're both aware of the modern history of both of these programs. They just, they've had good teams this time or that time, but haven't really captured the attention of the nation the way they are right now.
And I was glad to see that the attention after the games on Saturday, was about what happened on the field Saturday. You look at some of those national writers that came down, and some of those stories that were told leading up to the game last week were not about the football game itself. They were about, how fat Mississippi is, how uneducated Mississippi is, how racist Mississippi is. None of that had anything to do with those games on Saturday. And, I was glad to see that both teams were able to kind of erase all of that and put the focus where it should have been, which is on those football games and the jobs that those two teams did last week, knocking off highly ranked opponents and kind of getting into that national spotlight. You look at both teams being tied for third in the country right now. They're going to share. They're sharing the Sports Illustrated cover right now. It's a really exciting time to be a fan of football in Mississippi, unless maybe you're a Southern Miss fan.
Yeah, the third place tie, man. Ralph Russo, who used to be the AP sports guy in Mississippi, he knew what he was doing there. He probably kind of manipulated those points just a little bit. I couldn't quite make out this number here on the ballot. Got a little hanging chad over here. It looks like, Logan, the national media is intent on making sure that State and Ole Miss play nice in the sandbox this month. So, yeah. Anyway, it is interesting to see all of the sharing going on. Ole Miss at Texas A&M, 8 o'clock, ESPN. The newly expanded Kyle Field, 106,000. What we're hearing is how loud it will be. I'll tell you, Logan, I mean, we hear that too about Starkville. You ring, the ringing cowbells and everything. Look, there reaches a point where, a decibel here, a decibel there, it really doesn't make any difference. I'm not sure that it's going to make a big difference for Ole Miss if they go and don't perform well. I really don't think it will be because of the noise level at Kyle Field. These teams, when you reach this point, they've played in big environments. They've played before noisy crowds before. Ole Miss played before large and loud last year and had a lot of success against Texas on the road there in Austin. So anyway, I don't think it would be the noise that would keep Ole Miss from performing at a high level this week. We'll see how the Rebels look emotionally. Have they truly bounced back from that big Alabama win? They have said all the right things during the week. They've talked about putting it to bed and putting it behind them and focusing on Texas A&M. And look, it's college football. If you're going to be a great team, if you're going to be a number 3 ranked team, if you're going to be a team that has a chance to make that 4-team playoff, you're going to have to win in tough environments, and this will be one. Really, the first road test for Ole Miss. There have been 2 neutral site games. The Rebels beating Boise in Atlanta and then winning against Vanderbilt in Nashville, but in the Titans Stadium there. So the first time the Rebels will play in an opponent's stadium this year, and it'll be interesting to see if they can continue to play clean and crisp. That was something they did against Alabama. Limited penalties, limited turnovers, a good game of decisions from Bo Wallace, a good game for the defense. They're going to need all of those things, and we'll see where the real A&M team is. I think to put them back at home after several games away, to put them as the team that is coming off a loss and as a team feeling like it has something to prove. I mean, there's every reason right now with the home game, the night game, the big crowd behind them, the chip on their shoulder, for A&M to rally and feel like they have something to prove. So anyway, that's Ole Miss and A&M, 8 o'clock ESPN Saturday night. Logan, you got the CBS game, man, 2:30, MSU and Auburn. Do you like a 2:30 start?
Anytime in the PM, I'm usually fine with. But now that I'm actually writing on deadline the last 2 years for the Daily Journal, I start to appreciate those earlier games. Those later games are tough to get everything that you want to say into your game story and into your notebook and just kind of break down the game that you want to because you're so focused on meeting that deadline. So I'm starting to appreciate those earlier games now. Kind of going back to what you said, though, Parrish, about Kyle Field. I was there last year. I was actually in the last game that they held there before their renovation. And it was neat that they had the wreckers and bulldozers and all that stuff. As soon as that game was over and that stadium cleared out, they went to work. And they started working. They were actually working on knocking down some of that stuff and starting the construction before I even left the stadium that day. And they worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in order just to get what they've done accomplished by the start of this football season. And just the atmosphere that you can expect at Kyle Field, it was kind of a different atmosphere. It's really unique, kind of what they do there at Texas A&M. So Ole Miss fans can kind of expect to see something probably they've never seen before, just with all the yell leaders, and it's just a really unique atmosphere there.
And at least one of those workers hung an Alabama flag on the stadium. That was a nice off-season story, I remember. Let's use that as a segue, Logan. Talk about a few SEC games here. Interesting game, Alabama and Arkansas, with all of the national conversation right now about the dynasty for Nick Saban. Is it over? Is it limited? What about this team? Then you get A.J. McCarron's comments during the week being critical of the Alabama offense and play calling and what he perceived as a lack of leadership. Going to an Arkansas team that, look, Logan, they've looked better. Everybody agrees they're better. They've got a nice win over Texas Tech. They don't have an SEC win yet under Brett Bielema. What do you think happens in this game?
I don't know if it's going to be this week, but I think Arkansas is going to knock off somebody in the SEC West. I don't know exactly who it's going to be. If it's going to be Alabama, it may be Ole Miss, it may be Mississippi State. I think they're going to get somebody. That team's just too talented not to get a win. I don't think they go winless this year. I think that they're going to knock off somebody. That run game is so potent. I just don't see how they cannot win in the SEC with that. I know it's kind of one-dimensional. They need to improve their defense. They need to improve their passing game. But that run offense is so good, and he was so successful with it at Wisconsin. I think he's going to make it successful at Arkansas. It may just take a while.
Well, it will be interesting to see how they do against Alabama, who leads the SEC in run defense. I saw an interesting note on Twitter a few minutes ago where this one fellow, an ESPN employee, I believe, said an Arkansas running back, the last Arkansas running back to have a rushing touchdown against Alabama was Darren McFadden. That's a streak that very well could end this week. I think Alabama wins the game. Yeah, if they don't, maybe maybe that national conversation is right, and maybe there are cracks in the foundation. Arkansas is a team that could expose them further if they're there. LSU, Florida, Logan in Gainesville. What a circus right now in Gainesville, man. With Treon Harris, a true freshman quarterback, coming off the bench, rallying the Gators to a big win, although it was 10-9. I mean, it wasn't like it was a big offensive shootout, and he had a lot of statistics, but he won the game. They win the game there in Knoxville against the Vols, their biggest rival there in the Eastern Division. Treon Harris comes home, and then all of a sudden he's got legal issues, the allegation of sexual assault. He's suspended. Then you get two players fighting each other outside the stadium this week. The backup quarterback and and a freshman player, and it looks like it was over allegedly stolen cleats. You got a lot going on in Gainesville there, and you got a coach who's trying to win enough to keep his job.
Exactly. It's just a circus. You described it right. I mean, there's no. It'd be crazy to be on that beat covering that team this year. I mean, not only do you have the seat really hot for Will Muschamp this year, you got all this other extracurricular stuff going on, and Florida's winning. They're not winning pretty, but they're winning. But is that enough to keep Muschamp's job? I know the fans are starting to light those torches and get those pitchforks out for him, and LSU has not looked good the last 2 weeks themselves. Well, I guess I should say the 2 out of the last 3 games for LSU, and they're still trying to figure out who they're going to put at quarterback. Auburn dominated LSU from start to finish last week. LSU didn't really get hardly anything accomplished last week at all, and they're trying to bounce back. I don't think LSU's as bad as they have looked the last couple of weeks, but I think their confidence is definitely shot, and they're going to have to get some confidence back. And whether it's this week against Florida or on down the road, I think that they do have talent on that team, but it may take a while to start showing up.
Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, you just look at LSU on both sides of the ball right now, last in the SEC and run defense, and and while they put up all those points against New Mexico, I mean, except a couple of touchdowns late against State in a frantic rally. I mean, they just haven't gotten much done. 7 points against Auburn. I mean, some of those clips against Auburn, man. I mean, watching Nick Marshall run for a touchdown. It's bad, Logan, when in this day and age, you run into the end zone and you're still standing. You see a lot of people breaking through the line or jumping over the line, or but when you're down there in the red zone and you run a running play and you're in the end zone standing up, man, that's like that leadoff double to the corner where you just kind of cruise into second base and shoot the arrow or something, Yeah,
it was. I got to actually watch some of the Auburn and LSU game last week, and it was. I actually ended up switching to the Kentucky game because it was a lot more exciting ball game to watch. And like I said, it just really wasn't much of a ball game at all. I got to see. I was impressed with what I saw from Auburn, and knew that kind of watching them to see what I could kind of break down to put in some of my game coverage this week for the Mississippi State game. But other than that, I ended up changing the channel to the Kentucky and South Carolina game because that was a heck of a game in and of itself.
I tell you what, Logan, I think the Kentucky trip could be a dangerous one for State. How do you think they match up?
Well, if they do get past Auburn this week, which I think they will, I think that's one of those trap games that you have to watch out for. Because Kentucky is putting up a fight. I mean, they took Florida into what was it, double overtime? I know it went into 1 overtime for sure.
I think it was triple. Yeah, I think it was 3 overtimes there.
Could have been, and like I said, it just. They've got a really impressive team. They've got some talent. Stoops has brought in some good players over the last couple of years, and they've recruited well. They still really don't have that depth, so if Mississippi State can wear them down, but the fact that it's in Lexington and Mississippi State's going to be coming off of 3 straight top 10 opponents, and if they do beat Auburn this week, that could go along with the number 1 national ranking. Mississippi State, is going to have to stay focused. They're going to not be able to get up on their high horse and think they're just going to roll the ball out there and win that ball game. But we'll kind of preview that next week. But Mississippi State's got a huge one this weekend.
Well, I tell you what, man, we see the Kentucky fan base for basketball. The Kentucky fan base is there. Now, whether or not you're going to bring out everybody who has basketball season tickets, that doesn't matter. That's a nice sized area. That's the dominant school in the state in terms of fan interest and fan, coverage. Louisville is nice, but that's just so much more of an urban school. I mean, right there, the interest in Kentucky is in Kentucky. And if you give them a reason to be interested in their football team, they're going to turn out, and that's going to be a difficult place to play. You could see, the excitement for that team. That was the other rush the field game. That they also were fined by the SEC this week, as was Ole Miss. Ole Miss, by the way, managed to raise the money from private contributions to pay for both the $50,000 fine and the roughly $22,000 goalpost there. Folks, that's it for this edition of Talking SEC Football. Remember, late start for Ole Miss. We will have a lot of coverage online at the blog at InsideOleMissSports.com and also at djournal.com. So lots of online coverage there. We'll have stories in the paper as well on Sunday morning. We'll be holding that press for that game. Folks, that's it for this edition. Come back and join us next week.